I'm live. I'm on. Hutep, bless up everyone. And welcome to another session of African science class with Haile Griot. Yeah, I call myself the seed planter because I like to plant seeds of knowledge. Because I find that we know a lot, yet paradoxically, we know very little about the lot that we know. Yes? And another mantra here is receiving correct information inculcates correct knowledge, which generates correct thinking and produces correct action. Yes? So this is what we're dealing with. Correct knowledge. I'm trying to do this paper on emancipation or a cup match. Is it a celebration or protest? Yeah. So, but before I get into this here, I must have to not acknowledge all the ancestors. Yes. All of my books that I have from ancestors. Yeah. Particularly the latest one is the great teacher Renoki Rashidi. He was doing a tour of Egypt that he was doing quite frequently, and he transitioned yesterday. Late, I got the news late last night. Yeah, from all the Facebook. But I just want to do because I don't know how many people know of this great warrior. We bought him his car several years back. Um, and it was a great visit that he had. It was a Sutramet or Nicole Stubble that suggested that Curb try to bring him in, and I facilitated that. I was the liaison person between him. I contacted him, and he was gracious enough to come. And he done several things. He went to school, Barclay, I believe. I've been a while now, but he also went up to the prisons and done a presentation there. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And so he transitioned yesterday. I don't know his age or all of that details. I don't have as yet. But I just want to do a biographical note from out of this book that he was very involved in the African presence in early Asia, edited by Renoki Rashidi and co-edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Great man, great man. So, but now here's about Dr. Renoki Rashidi, editor. Renoki Rashidi is a historian, research specialist, writer, and public lecturer focusing on the African foundation of world civilizations. As a lecturer, he has made major presentations in 66 different colleges and universities in the United States, as well as in Belize, Egypt, England, France, India, and Japan. From 1981 to 1984, he was employed as an African history research specialist at Compton Community College. From 1985 to 1987, Rashidi was the history editor of the National Black Computer Network. Since 1983, he has been an active member of the board of directors and the board of editors of the Journal of African Civilizations. In August 1993, he taught the first ever graduate level course at Comparative Civilizations at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Currently, he is a social sciences consultant at McClemens High School in Oakland, California, scholar in residence at Aman-Ra African People's Community College, a community church in Los Angeles, California, and United States representative of Dalite Voice, the voice of the persecuted nationalities denied human rights. This is in India. The Dalites are people of India, the black people, the untouchables as they're called. Now, as a writer, Rashidi's articles have appeared in more than 20 community national and international publications. He has been a regular contributor to the Journal of African Civilizations and editor of the African Presence in Early Asia, with the 10th anniversary edition. He has been described as the world's foremost authority on the African presence in Asia. He is the author of Introduction to the Study of African Classical Civilizations, published in 1993 by Carnac House in London, England, and the Global African Community, the African Presence in Asia, Australia, and the South Pacific, published by the Institute of Independent Education in Washington, D.C. in 1994. He is currently preparing major works in the Nile Valley and beyond, the African presence in ancient and modern Asia, and the Black presence in ancient and modern India. Formation, yeah. So he passed, and this is, like I said, that goes back to the 90s, and he's done a great body of work since then. He's got several more books, of which publications I really need to get. But so this is a great ancestor who just made his transition yesterday into the ancestral realm. Peace to his family and one love to all of his. And getting back to this information, we covered a lot of material prior to now. I don't really want to go over and give another synopsis of it. People hopefully will get the previous videos and go back and look at this here. So suffice it to say that on the 1st of August, 1835, we decided to hold a protest because of the conditions in which Black people were being subjected to by the white people after they was told that they was going to be emancipated, and we went over what emancipation means, and it does not mean what most people think. It has nothing to do with freedom whatsoever. It has to do with freeing or relinquishing, or the parent relinquishing all responsibility, being relinquished or absolved of all responsibilities for the upkeep and maintenance of their child. Yeah, so they don't have to house, clothe, or feed them any longer. The child will be living with someone else, and hence they will be emancipated. Yeah, or they're not really living by themselves, but the parent was no longer obligated to provide any of these necessities for the child. This is what emancipation means. So this is why Black people are called minorities by white people, because it has nothing to do with the numbers of people in the world, because we outnumber white people almost on a scale of 10 to 1 in reality. But it has to do with how they thought about us as children. We were their children. They were our parents. Yes, hence the slave and slave master relationship dynamic. Yes, that's how they thought about it. So when they emancipated us, was on August the 1st, 1834, they put us out. After they made sure that they got their money, they got paid for emancipating us. And so we had to go back, and they made several laws, Jim Crow laws. I'm going to talk about this earlier. I'm going to start this here coming from out of the book David McRitchie wrote in 1884, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 and 2, right? And we're talking about these laws that was instituted as well in America as well as in Bermuda when they freed the slaves, as they like to say, lying. Yes, while lying. So David McRitchie wrote this book, and we're going to start at pages 363 and 337, and we're going to read. It has been stated that the United Kingdom, during the reigns of James I and his immediate successors, presented two different forms of national life, character and customs, as if they belonged to two entirely different and even hostile races. Now, the Cavaliers or horsemen and the parliamentarians, these were the two different factions. The Cavaliers or horsemen, then we look at Three Musketeers, when we just came through the Dumases, when we talked about the Dumases, and they wrote about the Cavaliers, the Three Musketeers who were Cavaliers, yes, and the parliamentarians. Now, the recreations of the horsemen were horse racing, betting, cockfighting, bear baiting, prize fighting, sleight of hand, jugglery, minstrelsy, buffoonery, and general vagabondism. That's what they wrote about them. When the opponent was in power, all these things were frowned at. The two societies were totally dissimilar, and there is much reason for believing that this difference was, to a great extent, a matter of race. An examination of the statutes of various periods must necessarily suggest a good deal which is ethnological. That's good. The dislike of the Puritans to actors and minstrels is often ascribed to a feeling of quasi-religious nature. The bards and minstrels of Scotland, as well as those of Ireland and Wales, incurred the reprehension of government at certain periods. When we see the terms bard, minstrels, and of Scotland and those of Ireland and Wales, we should always reflect back to the griot, or the jelly as they call it in Africa. These was the same people. That's what they done the same things. So griot is a French term for jelly, which is the African term, and they told the history of the land and the peoples. That's what they were. They were recorders of histories, lands, and peoples. And the bards and the minstrels of Scotland, as well as those of Ireland and Wales, done the same thing. And they incurred the reprehensions of government at the certain periods. but then at what periods and of what kind of man were such governments mainly formed? In the 15th century, a struggle was going on in Scotland between the two rival confederacies, one of which was that headed by the Moorish, the Black Douglases, hence the term black as a Moor, because a lot of people don't understand the term Moor means black, literally. It has nothing to do with a nationality, so which a lot of people is claiming right now. There's no such thing as nationality. It was a description of a people the same way. Black is a description, it has nothing to do with nationality. In other words, as such, yes. One of these two confederacies that which favored the minstrels and etc. were overcome, and its armies dwindled down into bands of marauding Moors or Saracens. And the conqueror in the struggle, James II of Scotland, forthwith enacted the laws for the away putting of soners, which is forcible obtruders, fancy fools, vagabonds, outliers, masterful beggars, bards, straining rhymers, and such like runners about. The people passed these laws, and they tried to enforce them, and those who continued to defy them were in reality continuing the war that had apparently come to an end in 1455. And if you read the book, you look what happened in 1455 is when it says that 1455 is when the Black Douglases lost to the White Douglases, or the Red Douglases, Angus, yes? Because the Black Douglases, Douglas actually means the black man, literally. It means the black person. In the early days of Scotland, say 1000 or earlier, Scotland was ruled by black people up until 1455. England had a lot of black folks on either side. Ireland and Wales the same way. As a matter of fact, Scot means black Irish. Get this book and read it, please. So now let's contextualize this. All that the black people received from their white oppressors on being set free after centuries of enforced free labor and oppressive laws was the attitude that the darkies should be grateful to them for being so kind as to free them, while at the same time, the white colonial population received from the white colonists' cousins, an immediate cash injection of 50,584 pounds, 7 shillings and half a pence, apparently, for loss of the property. Same thing that happened to France, by the way, to Haiti. That's what France done to them. They charged them for loss of the property. So now the property being 4,203 black people. Indians were no longer being identified separately. In the book Chained on the Rock, this is where the information comes from. When I look, you find Indians being mentioned out early on in the book. As we go further and further along in the book, we get to a certain point where Indians are no longer mentioned as a separate people. Yes, they were just, at that point, niggers. The term not really generally used in Bermuda, but the sentiment was always there, bunch of niggers. So this was the immediate position that the great majority of black people were in on in 1st of August, 1834, homeless and penniless, or criminals, subjected to all the newly enacted racist vagabond laws, which we read about early on in this paper. So let's look at what the Echoes of Bermuda's Past says about the black people's situations post-emancipation and the origin of cup match, page 50-51. And I'm going to read something from out of this excellent book called Freedom Fighters, from Monk to Monzambo, about the plight of the peoples during a certain time, like the early 1900s. Look at what the Echoes of Bermuda Past says about the black people's situation post-emancipation and the origin of cop match in page 50-51. And so I've underlined these two things as hike to show the different contexts because of the unconscious bias that white people keep talking about, and they don't notice it, but it's all throughout such things. But anyhow, and it even comes across to black people as well. So the celebration referred to was one of the many held annually to commemorate the anniversary of the freedom. And the conspicuous feature of these celebrations was the quiet dignity and decorum with which they were conducted. This always been an only concern that they have whites have about us, which is true. They just want to know that we're not going to upset the apple cart. We're not going against the status quo. Hence why Bishop Barclay wanted to make a school for the captured children of Canada, to put them here, miseducate them, indoctrinate them, and send them like seeds again back into the communities. But that's another story again. Foremost among the organizers of these activities were the Friendly Societies and Lodges, and they which was organized by blacks and dedicated to the welfare and Bermuda's premier event on the cricket calendar, the annual cup match between Somerset and St. George's, and my team just lost really badly, and evolved from the efforts of these groups. Yes, so it had nothing to do with the clubs in the early goings. It had everything to do with the friendly societies and lodges. And the game was chosen between the two lodges of East and West. Yes. Now here we note that this match started out as part of the activities during the event of remembrance, held under the auspices of the Friendly Societies. This is long before there was any cricket club that was formed, because we didn't come out of the emancipation forming a cricket club. First we had to find food, clothing, and shelter, which was made difficult by the other things I read about earlier, such as you can't move out of the place of where you were set free. Somerset, St. George's, Warwick, Paget, Devonshire, Pembroke, whatever parish you was in, a male could not leave that parish to live. They had to stay there, so making them a debt slave. So the origin of the event can be traced back to 1901, when during an annual picnic attended by blacks to mark the anniversary of the emancipation of the enslaved people in Bermuda, the East and West branches of the Oddfellows Lodge played in a hotly contested impromptu cricket match. After the game, both sides agreed to renew their friendly rivalry in the following year and to play for a trophy to highlight the occasion. The trophy was bought in England for 20 guineas, with both groups undertaking to share the cost of this purchase. And that word guineas is a word that one should look up. I'm going to do some reading and writing on what the term guineas, where it comes from and what it talks about. Yeah. As you can see, it has to do with money, but other things as well, like New Guinea. Yeah, everybody heard of New Guinea. Anyhow, back to the reading. Thus, in 1902, this annual event, whose historic links with post-emancipation celebrations in Bermuda are self-evident, officially took place for the first time in Bermuda. So hence they, although they've been playing cricket all these years as part of the celebration, they actually elevated to is their format. In other words, they organized it a little bit more officially. Now, the competition in that year involved 3 separate matches, but in the following year, the best of 3 format was abandoned. The decision being to play a single match of a 2-day time frame. In 1944, 2 official national holidays were set aside to accommodate the Cock Match Classic, which is now the centerpiece of Bermuda's cricket calendar. We now see fully 68 years had passed. 3 generations before we decided to formalize and develop a format for what up to that time was only a part of the historical observances of emancipation. Hence, the name Cup Match came into being, with the sides representing the Eastern or Western Oddfellows Lodge. Also, it only took the whites 110 years to begrudgingly officially grant us something we had already been doing for 5 generations. And Mr. Smith here makes a quote from Dr. Eva Ann Hudson's great work, Second Class Citizens, First Class Man, which I wish to expound on from pages 39 to 39. Yes, this is particularly her observation of a businessman named Mr. Wesley Leroy Tucker. So 38 to 39, I'm going to read from that. This book is not in this paper, so I'll do this here. Because it's this, what it says here. Before Roy, 39, yeah. Before Roy was out of his teens, he had accumulated what was, for that time, a fair capital, built up as a result of pennies, 3 pences, and 6 pences, which he earned selling candies to large cricket match crowds on Cup Match Day. Cup Match was a day when Negroes protested against their bondage by throwing off all care for 2 days. Yeah. So it says that she wrote that Cup Match was a day when the Negroes protested against their bondage by threatening off all care for 2 days. The Cup Match was the one truly spontaneous holidays for the people by all the people of Bermuda, or the black people, that is. It was then, as now, the one and only true symbol and celebration of the black man's emancipation. I don't know if it was a celebration, as she said, it was a protest. There's 2 days of cricket held on Emancipation Day, and springing originally from the picnics of the friendly societies, remain today an event of moment in the lives of the Bermuda Negroes. And what I want to read as well is that the thing about like what's happening even nowadays is that personally I feel we have been, as black people, we're being pushed away from the Cup Match with the mentality of the presidents and the committees of these clubs. In Bermuda, generally, there is no respect for black history. We don't keep this history alive. We go and we let other things come up. So today, you pay $25 to get into a game, when really it should be free for black people. They don't want it free because the clubs have to upkeep that stuff, even though they get some big money from the government nowadays, apparently. But anyhow, so this was uniquely our own holiday. So how are we being charged for it? And once again, they always come down to money. So, like I said, it's all the history that we as Negroes can claim. The next one is going to maybe storm in the teacup. Up until then, I don't see us doing anything of the moment like that. In the first flush of his moment of success, which seems to have met this new thrust forward after a decade of collective, if sporadic protest, he may come to believe that his past, unlike the past of others, is irrelevant to either his present or his future. Yes? This is coming up with the talk about the schools closing down the schools. So we're going to, in Somerset in particular, we're going to keep the white school. Yes? For whatever reason, I don't know. For whatever reason, they keep the white school, which was the Somerset Primary, as it was called. And we're going to get rid of the black school that had a great history for black people over the centuries. Yes? I think it's 110, it's about 110 over the century. We done that in Somerset so that we could educate our children. Because I don't know when that other school came into existence, but we were very much dedicated to educating ourselves. And we created the school right across from Sand Secondary, which is another historic school. But this government of today, like it says right here, we may have come to believe that his past, unlike the past of others, is irrelevant to either his present or his future, and that the continuation of Cup Match is, in some strange way, a form of unnecessary protest. Now that has been permitted slowly, with hesitation and with no little reluctance and compromise, to share in other local events, he may well be persuaded that Cup Match, which was his from its inception and which he created, is no longer of significance. Not so much that deal, but they have really made it of no significance to people like myself, who I don't bother to go to the game. I never really was a big cricket fan, but it was like the pomp and circumstance that was always around it. But it becomes like a little bit jaded when you find these big corporations being sold out the prime spots, and they put up these erect these big, can't see past some things. Can't see the game. So for the ordinary person like me, pays $25 to get into the game. I can't get to see the game because I've got this big scaffold in the way, and I can't get a good vantage spot. Not like in the previous days, because like I said, we had created this thing and we was getting, like Mr. Leroy Tucker, he was making money from off it. But now you can't take nothing into the match. Everything is made by vendors, nothing for you to do. You have to stand outside the gate and hope that people will buy your stuff. But this is not for us anymore. So I wanted to get that out. So because now he can participate in the floor pageant, now Negroes are no longer marshaled along the sides of the street like children sat in rows to watch a meaningless pageantry. And I remember that floral pageant that we became, and they even stopped that there, and they sort of like try to combine it with what they call the Queen's birthday now and the Bermuda Day now. The Queen's birthday being the 24th of May, And if you don't get a holiday, we're all going to run away. Yeah, that's 24th of May that they combine this floral pageant now with them, so because people want to do the parade thing and have the floats. Yes, all of that goodness, which is nothing to do with us now. Now, Negro is no longer a martial officer. So now perhaps he will care for only those bits and pieces of Bermuda which for so long have been denied him. And if that should be so, then the colored man of Bermuda will be doomed in the future to an even greater curse than in the past. He will not only have lost what the centuries of slavery have snatched from him, but deliberately and shamefully, he would have turned his back also on those dark, silent days of torment, which have molded both him and his present. Yeah? But then, in the youthful days of Leroy Tucker, cop match was all the colored man had, and the money which had been sacrificially saved for so long throughout the year was spent with abandonment on that day. So it was self-help. We were doing self-help programs. It was a very good day indeed for businesses, and so some of the subtle but apparent contradictions and conflicts between the goals of Leroy Tucker and the motivations and ideals of his people seemed to take root in Cop Match Day, the day above all others, when every young colored boy threw care to the wind. Roy Tucker seriously and with great self-denial established his business, although in truth the traditionally typical carefree attitude was never his. But anyhow, so Mr. Tucker took advantage of this self-help date that we created for ourselves to enjoy and also to make money off of personally. But like I said, it was not, today is not going to the people then. It's over to the clubs and to the how can I say, he might have been a roundabout to the sponsors of the event, which is not us black people, white people. And to me, I find that a total travesty, total travesty. So that was the little bit I want to read from out of that book. Is some very interesting stuff to read these books, Bermuda books. We need to do better. We really need to do better because we don't do better with our black history in Bermuda or elsewhere. To be quite honest, we really need to do better. So this is why I do this class, like I said, to bring these things back out and examine them. So the roles of the friendly societies and lodges were of extreme importance to the welfare of the ex-slaves, who besides being affected by severe economic pressures triggered by emancipation, which is depression of trade and shipping, but that wasn't us anyhow because that was to do for the white people because they had all of that stuff. We didn't have any of that. We're also confronted with a serious housing crisis because, like I said, in order to, when they put us out into the street, we didn't have no clothes, we didn't have no food, we didn't have no shelter. So we had to rely upon ourselves. Yes? So we're also confronted with a serious housing crisis, a legacy of the slavery era. So prior to, 1827, slaves had no right of property. Prior to 1827, which is 3 and 7 years prior to the whites relinquishing their obligations to house, clothe, and feed us. And when they received their freedom, most were technically homeless since they did not earn real estate and their former masters were no longer legally bound to provide them with accommodations. Remember, this is what emancipation is. In 1834, most of the land in Bermuda was owned by the former slave owners, while some of the ex-slaves, particularly those who were rehired as free agents by previous masters, continued to live in former slave quarters. A large number had to, you see that? It says, well, some of the ex-slaves, particularly those who were rehired as free agents by previous masters, so we had to go back to them. You see the change in the guard, nature of engagement? I'm going to tell you what it is after. So I'm going to go back up to and read it. But continued to live in former slave quarters. A large number had to rely upon the beneficence of free blacks who during the slavery period, particularly towards the end, managed to acquire property and build houses. So just prior to emancipation, there was over 1,200 free blacks living in the colony, and a number of these earned their own property. Now, here Mr. Smith makes mention of this 43 blacks who had sent a petition 7 months prior to emancipation to the whites about their racist laws and practices and the distrust that the whites would change their ways, which was well founded up to today. Whites have not changed their ways. They're still just as the same as they were in 1834 and prior. And that there were 14 freeholders or landowners, as he had pointed out, who would have been able to assist in housing some of the people kicked off the white people's property with nothing. And the provision of additional accommodations by this is quoting from out of the book now, the provision of additional accommodations by the small free black community helped alleviate the housing problem, but it fell well short of solving it, for as long as a disproportionate share of Bermuda's land area remained in possession of the ruling whites, the blacks were destined to experience a serious housing shortage over an extended period. A letter published in the Gazette of 13th of February, 1883, indicated that upon receiving the freedom to act, now this is in 1883, almost 50 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, yes? This is what they wrote. They talking about the black people, the ex-slaves, crowd in great numbers in small, confined, and badly ventilated cabins. This is what we was left to. This is what we left up to. And the economic burdens of the black community, combined with a political impotence induced by legislation which gave control to the legislator, to the landowners, made it absolutely necessary to organize cooperative movements to ensure their survival. Dr. Kenneth Robinson highlights this point in Heritage at page 118. There's another book we should have, and I shall expand on this passage for more clarity. And it says 118. Let me go back to there. Let me find that page 118. I'll tell you, these are books that we should. I don't have all the books that I should have, but I'm happy to have the books that I do have. I have to get more. The black Bermudans showed a strong disposition and inclination to organize for survival and for taking advantage of social situations. He was gregarious, inquisitive. Gregarious means stick together, like that's African. That is African. Inquisitive, imitative, secretive upon occasion, and sensitive to the need to plan and scheme. Yeah, because in Israel we need to scheme. In white people's in the white people's world, we need to scheme. So now, prior to abolition, he organized for entertainment and pleasure, for enlightenment, and for mutual assistance and benefit, and his legacies on these realms were enhanced during the first post-abolition quarter century. Some of his organizations and activities were tolerated and even encouraged by white people. Others persisted in spite of disfavor, ridicule, and at times aggressive opposition. Many black Bermudians shared an inclination to emulate white people to some degree, but the original tended to be significantly altered in the translation. In other words, we took white culture and made a black culture and tweaked it a bit by causing that there, so it wasn't really quite the same. Yeah, and so, but yet we must have to remember it's still based upon white idealism. So it's a problem. We need to get rid of all of that there and come back to South. Moreover, in the opinion of certain observers, African influences and inspirations came into play, at least in some instances. In other words, like I said, we have not forgotten our Africanness. They try to take it out of us. And I saw that even in the 60s, there's some things that people didn't, I was born in the 60s, people wasn't really cognizant of, and was still there today. Now, happily, much information is extended so that it would be possible to consider fairly fully the performing arts and music, 2 police public libraries, 2 private seminaries, and the friendly societies and associations. So this book is going to go into that there, which one I'm going to go into right now. And because they get performing arts and music, and they talk about the people that's doing that there, and pre-abolition days too. So yeah, that is from out of Heritage, saying that many black Bermudians shared an inclination to emulate white people to some degree, but the original tended to be significantly altered in the translation. And moreover, in the opinion of certain observers, African influences and inspirations came into play, at least in some instances. So yeah, that is what we're dealing with from that book there, from Dr. Kevin F. Robertson. Yeah, so that was that. But now, because I have time now, because that was the end of my paper, and it's 7:40, and I got a long ways to go with my class. So that was the end of the paper, so to speak. Actually, I'm still in the throes of writing, and I want to add more to it because that's what I do. But that was just about the history. So we see from the history, that brief history that I gave about the emancipation protest, because Dr. Hudson said, and that's that it was a protest against the conditions upon which we were subjected to after slavery, after emancipation. Because as I read early on, let me go back up to the top, and I want to bring in some things about some other things, and got time to do that. We live in a society that is called, what is it called? Capitalism. Yes? So what about capitalism? It has to do with a way of living, but let us look at where it comes from. So the chattel, but it comes from, it has to do with chattel. So we're going to read this here. Chattel is a noun, and it has synonyms, and it's in general used a personal possession. Yes? So synonymous with asset, thing, article, items, belongings, things, property, worldly goods, and all of that there. Or they go chattels, movement, movables, valuables, goods and chattels, girl, junk, traps, clubber. That's what chattel is. And in law, an item of property other than freehold land, including tangible goods, chattels, which is personal, and leasehold interest, which is chattels, real. And see goods and chattels. And the synonyms again: property, possessions, personal effects, worldly goods, chattels, goods and chattels, valuables, accoutrements, apparatuses, paraphernalia, trappings, rubbish. Those are all synonyms for chattel, club and gubbins, junk, gear, kit, bits and pieces. But what is its origin? The origin of chattel is Middle English, from the Old French chattel, which is from the medieval language of Latin capital, which is from Latin capitalist, from caput, head, and compared with capital one and chattel. Yeah? So it says chattel slavery, the most extreme form of slavery in which the enslaved were treated as property. That's what it was. And then we have from Middle English chattel, from Old French chattel, from medieval Latin capital, which in English is capital, from Latin capitalist, of the head, from caput, head, and alice, which is owl, compared to double cattle or cows, which is from an Anglo-Norman variant. Compare also capital and kit and kin, all of one's possessions, which also uses cow to mean property. So what are we? We're going from a chattel society into a capital society. What's the difference? The only difference between a capital society and a chattel society is the emancipation. Yes? Where the former owner of the chattel is no longer responsible to house and feed, clothe his capital now. Yes? A word change. The word still means it's the same. It's from the medieval Latin capital, which is the English capital. Old French chattel, which is the worst form of slavery, the most extreme form of slavery, in which the enslaved were treated as property. Yes? So this is what we were dealing with. This is what we were fighting against. This is what we were protesting. This, like you said, the brothers who wrote the letter 7 months before, and also the brothers that got together to try to set up a better wage packet when they became emancipated, were all shut down. And so hence, like I said, when 1834 and 1835, August the 1st came around, we decided that we were not going to work according to the vagabond laws. We was going to fight against those laws and just do what we was going to do, and how we, come hell or high water. And they left us alone for 110 years, and then decided to make it official. They decided to make it official, and this is what we have. So yeah, this is what this paper was about on why we was having cotton match today. Who knows this here? This information is not brought forth like this here. It's not examined like this here. Everybody's just talking about the money that could be made or what we should be doing. Nobody realizes what the day is all about. As far as I'm concerned, we really need to. And this is what Ronoka Rashidi was about. Documenting. He took pictures of us, documenting our stories all over the world. This is what he was doing. He went and took pictures of people all over, like I said, the Dalites up in India, all the way to the South Pacific, all the way down in Mexico, all the way over, even in Bermuda. Yeah. So this is what we did. But now, what I'm going to do now is come to this other great book, because I want to show what was going on in the 1900s as well in Bermuda, and how we were being treated from all over the world. And because like we separate ourselves now into islands, Jamaican, Barbadian, St. Kittian, and Arubian, and Bermudian, and all of this islands, which means nothing to the white people then. We are not part of the society. That's why when Jamaica gained its independence, and they thought they was going to do something on the economic front, the white people pulled the rug free from underneath them, yes? So that in 1980, whatever, they wanted independence in the early 60s, yeah? And the rug was pulled up from underneath him in the early 60s, same economically speaking. So I was trying to think, when I went there with my family, I guess that too would have been my youngest daughter, around 5-ish. So she was born in 88. So this is in the early 90s we went down. And it was 10 to 1 at that time. Yeah, 10 Jamaican dollars to 1 American dollar. Now it's, how much is it? 100 to 1 maybe? It is outrageous. And not that they don't have abilities to do what they need to do for themselves. It's just that economically they have been hamstrung by whiteisms. Yes? The World Bank came in and done some things, and it's horrible, horrible, horrible down there. So $6,000 or $600 for, I went there, I bought a chocolate. It was a Snickers bar. That cost 90 cents in Bermuda. It cost how much in Jamaica currency? $9. Like I said, it was 10 to 1. So 90 cents got you a chocolate for $9. And it has not improved at all. But people are living. Mm-hmm. But at the behest or at the generosity of white people, still. And I've been independent since the 60s, but that's what independence will get you when it comes to these Europeans. Nothing. But like I said, out of this book, I want to read From Monk to Mazambo. And I think maybe I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and just come straight into people's view. Yeah, and I don't know if people have seen this, but I'm going to show you this book here, From Monk to Mazambo, Freedom Fighters, yes, by another ancestor, historical biography of Ira Phillips. And in this book, it shows you some other linkage too, to freedom fighters. Another freedom fighter is being the great Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and A.B. Place. Yeah. In this book, there's some pictures of. This is one of Mr. Charles Vinton Monk. Yeah, Charles Vinton Monk, freedom fighter. He was a AME churchman, came here in early 1900s. And he got immediately involved into the politics of the island because he was black. And like I said, it doesn't make a difference where people come from. This is another person, Spencer Joseph. This person right here. This person right, not this one. This one right here, Mr. Spencer Joseph. He was a lawyer that was brought here to try to defend the wickedness against us black people, against the wickedness of the people. This is Dr. Gordon and Wycliffe Stone. And I was looking for, oh yes, this gentleman here, Mr. A.B. Place. Mr. A.B. Place, very interesting. He started the Bermuda Recorder. He said, Mr. A.B. Place, moving spirit behind the establishment of the Bermuda Recorder. He was in his 94th year at the time of this publication of this book. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm going to go to more details about this brother here, but suffice it to say, I'm going to tell you what the relations are between Mr. A.B. Place, Mr. Vinton Monk, and the Honorable Messiah Marcus Garvey. Yeah, there's an interesting connection there, but let us go. And what I want to read is some Bermuda history. We was just talking about the vagrancy laws. So Mr. Vagrancy, so we were talking about the vagrancy and laws, and so when the white people said they was gonna emancipate their slaves so that they weren't responsible for them anymore, they made tenancy laws. Yeah, and we're gonna talk about that such law that Mr. Blakeney was caught up in, and this Mr. Blakeney is, let's go read about him. It was knowledge of the fact that Bermuda had to, this is coming from page 24. It was knowledge that the fact that Bermuda had to submit to the home government that led Alexander Hugh Blakeney to petition directly to His Majesty the King on November 13th, 1901. That's when, remember, we just had that first cup match, calling the cup match, against oppression and imprisonment in Bermuda. Mr. Blakeney, his great grandson Eugene Blakeney, became labor leader in Bermuda and a member of Parliament, wrote the King directly from Hamilton Prison, complaining of oppression and imprisonment. And there's also like Mr. Eugene Blakeney was brother to Glenn Blakeney, Hot 107, Hot 102. Yeah, so this is information about this. This is his legacy. Now, describing himself as a Negro and a native of Demerara in British Guyana. Remember, we talked about the Guinea early on. Yes, which is a currency. He said his imprisonment of a debt was fully compared with similar to the days of slavery. In his particular case, there was no trial or investigation as was customary in all British courts of justice, which British never had a court of justice. They always had a court of law. They didn't care about justice, especially when it comes to black people. I said there never was a British court of justice, especially when it comes to black people. It's courts of law. Now, the debt was for £7 plus 12 shillings. Court costs grew out of a law which was owed and bad, in which a tenant who occupied a house without an agreement was bound before vacating to give 6 months' notice or pay for the 6 months should he remain or leave. Yeah? So they had to pay 6 months. If he was going to leave, you had to talk about 6 months you was going to leave, and you had to pay for the 6 months whether you stayed or left. Now, Blakeney said he had vacated the dilapidated building to safeguard his family. His wife, who had been sick for a long time, died previous to his imprisonment because she was sick, living in a bad place. And having 5 children, he was unable to meet the court order. He had appealed to the governor, but did not get an answer until 12 days after he was jailed, stating that he could not intervene. So they took that red governor 12 days for he tell him, Negro, you're on your own. Now, Blakeney considered he had a just grievance that could have been dealt with better, which did not call for imprisonment and which lessened the respectability of a people yet in the emphasis of civilization. Yes. Concluding, Blakeney prayed, and may it please your most excellent majesty to grant some recompense, which shall have a tendency to cause a most charitable disposition between the two races of people, for everlasting good, and your majesty shall have all the praise. It was an extraordinary petition in his own extremely neat handwriting, reflecting a profound intellect, keen perception, and strong character. Blakeney, a tailor by trade and a proud, dedicated family man, was eventually deported because of his outspoken criticism of the power structure. So I won't go into more. The rest is like crazy because it's talking about, okay, so yet another petition was in July the 22nd, 1902. Yet another petition, remember that we get into the cup match. Yet another petition was dispatched to London, this time addressed, yes, this time addressed to the Secretary of State for the Colonies, the Right Honorable Joseph Chamberlain. It was from an elderly English gentleman, J. Leonard Chambers, a tailor by trade, another tailor, operating from Church Street, Hamilton, a block or two away from where Monk published. Okay, stop that. Come on, stop that. Where Monk published The New Era, which is his paper, on July the 22nd, wrote, I have all my life led politics alone and have no wish now in the closing days of my life to enter into the field. Rather, I shall content myself with simply calling your attention to the irregularities and inequities which shall prevail in every hand with Bermuda, and which go to make it everything but desirable for Englishmen, nay, for British subjects other than natives. Anyone capable of forming correct judgments and not blinded by prejudice will grant that until the government of these islands be directed through the colonial office, one section of His Majesty's subjects must remain victims of party rule in every walk of life. It's talking about how the business was of the state of affairs in Bermuda vis-a-vis white and black. James went on to state how he had arrived from England and set up an extensive tailoring business. He had taught the natives, the white Bermudians, that branch of the business, receiving in return their hatred and contumely. It was nothing for them to willfully impede the progress of trade in ways too numerous to be mentioned. He was likewise a victim of envy and malice of the native element in pursuit of his interest in horse racing. He did not exempt from his indictment that majority of government officials, whose chief recommendation seemed to be the patrician scorn which they regard foreigners, by which he meant British subjects other than Bermudians. Being an old man, Chambers said he did not hope to see the prosperity he was persuaded should ultimately come to Bermuda as a result of wise and impartial administration in every particular, but he ventured to hope to witness the inspection of race reforms leading thereunto. Finally declared, I humbly beg that my seeming boldness may be reckoned by my desire to see something other than mere oral equity meted out to all matters subjects alike in Bermuda. In other words, he was talking about how oral platitudes be given. In other words, yes, we're all equal or all even, and we're all subject to the same laws which he knew to be a lie. So let me go on to page 30 and talk about this place, because I don't think so much white is, but anyhow. So this is what was happening in this early years. So the Walker Works, the new works or Walker Works, as the extension became known, ranged over the entire island area from Watford Island through Burrs Island and Ireland Island, starting with the building of a Watford swing bridge and construction of a railway system used to carry tons of fuel for reclaiming land from the sea. The first batch of imported workers arrived, some 25 Italian masons and their families. That's where really Santuses came from. I knew these people. They were accommodated aboard a ship at the dockyard. At the outset, they worked well. When they began complaining about their living conditions, a decision was taken to replace them with Jamaicans. The plan for Barbadians fell through. Now, hundreds of Jamaicans were recruited, men, women, and children. They were herded aboard ships without regard of their age, gender, physical condition, or comfort. Sex. In other words, gender, sex. I prefer to use the word sex for a reason. Most were penniless, and by the time they reached Bermuda, were on the brink of starvation. Now, from the time they left Jamaica, their ill treatment began. Some 250 aboard one ship testified that they had not a morsel to eat during the last 24 hours of the journey. Wow. If conditions were appalling aboard ship, they were hardly battered at the camp which had been prepared for them at Kings Point in Somerset. The area later became the site of the luxurious Cambridge Beaches cottage colony. Monk, the New Era, reported on their plight. There's 250 human beings landed on this island and were placed in a house comprising 17 rooms without any furniture. They were herded sick and well, married and single, children and adults together. Some who were unable to crowd into the building were compelled to live in tents without blankets, with the grass for a bed. They were not furnished food by the company and were not given water to drink, cook, or wash. There was no hospital accommodation, and a sick man placed in a room where 7 men and 1 woman were living ultimately died on the bare floor. Moreover, the contractors apparently were not ready to keep all the workers fully employed during the first 5 months of their arrival. Those who worked alleged they were underpaid. John Clark, described as a contract laborer number 147, reported that for the first 4 nights' work, he got £6 4 shillings. They took £2.6 for passengers, 2 and 6 for passage. The next fortnight, having only worked 3 days, he got £3 or 3 shillings, out of which he took 2 and 6, leaving him with only 6 cents or 6 pence. For the first week in the camp, he slept on wood shavings on the ground. Eventually, he bought some boxes to make a bed. It rained. The tent broke, and he had to plead to be let inside the main house. Christian Bryan now told how she and her 14-year-old daughter were treated. They, along with 25 men and women, occupied one room. You heard what I said. They, along with 25 men and women, and if you know the houses that was built in Bermuda back in the day, these rooms weren't big. Not for these people. Eventually, he bought some. Oh, let's listen. The company did not furnish food. The girl was crying one day because she was hungry. Following complaints, the foreman provided some food but no water. She was not paid her wages of 1 shilling or £1 6 pence a day, or 6 cents a day. It might have been 1 shilling 6 cents a day, because that was a fair amount of money back in the day. The owner of the main campsite was the Somerset magistrate. The owner of the main campsite, Cambridge Beaches, was the Somerset magistrate. The official was later to commit Monk for trial for libel and to imprison several of the Jamaican workers for vagrancy and rioting, because they were trying to go find some help. Hence, Mr. What's his name again? I forget the name. The lawyer from Jamaica they went to get. What is his name? Let me go find the picture. Mr. Matthew Spencer Joseph. Yes? Legendary figure in his native Jamaica for his sensational exploits in Bermuda in 1903, and he was killed, as far as I'm concerned. He was poisoned when he came to Bermuda. These white people don't skull off, they would kill you. They still do that today. Now, the new era called the entire matter scandalous and conditions in and around the camp at Kings Point and Oxford House shocking. The magistrate attempted to soften the public outcry, decided to clean things up by evicting the woman from the camp, even though they had no alternative accommodation. Hence, he was going to make them vagrants. To kick them out of the camp, no accommodations, there's going to be a vagrant. That's the law, as you saw with Mr. Hugh Blakeney. Yeah. He said he couldn't pay, and the team was to throw him in jail, then they put his backside. Margaret Baker, like the other women, described how she had to spend the next few nights after her eviction sleeping on the road. She said she was starving, and were it not for the good people of Somerset, she would have to be dead but from hunger and the heavy dew. So this was what was happening at Kings Point, now in Oxford, now known as Cambridge Beaches. Yeah, it was a concentration camp. It was a camp to kill people off. Yeah. The first Jamaicans arrived in early May. On June the 20th, the first of a number of riots occurred in the dockyard. On June the 21st, first reading was given in Parliament to the Riot Act. Several Jamaicans were arrested and 8 were jailed as ringleaders for terms up to 6 months. Mount taking of the cultures of the workers became more and more engrossed, not just as an editor, but as the pastor of Allen Temple African Methodist Episcopal Church in the parish where all the problems were occurring. Matters went from bad to worse. Industrial accidents claimed the lives of a number of workers. The New Era, in its November 20, 1902 issue, called for better working conditions and how the contractors responsible for the deaths. The company promptly filed a charge of false and defamatory libel against Monk. Monk struck back. His next issue, I'm going to read this next issue, then again go on to what relationships was between these 3 people that I mentioned early on. Some of the Jamaicans having honored Hamilton's goal for some months ago by an unjust imprisonment was for simply demanding justice from Walker and the company subtractors, but justice will not be done until some of the other contracting parties shall disgrace the goal by an imprisonment for an open, brazen, barefaced violation of nearly every tenant of the contract, and some having control shall be brought into for a preservation of it. On protesting to the governor last week by some of these poor slaves, the governor recommended that these men should represent their grievance to the captain in charge of the dockyard, which was done. The representatives of the contractors being present, the inquiry clearly proved that the men were oppressed and that the terms of the contract violated. There is being perpetrated in Bermuda today one of the most brazen-faced pieces of diabolical rascality, I can't even get this word out, rascality, in the violation of contracts, thereby starving wives and children in Jamaica and keeping honest workmen with hardly anything to cover their nakedness. Although their contract guaranteed continuous work from the landing to the termination of the 2 years, there was nearly 100 of them without any work. The public ought to know both sides of the story. One Jamaican with a contract in his pocket requesting work yesterday was told by Robertson, who was the foreman, to go about his business or he would give him a kick and pay 10 shillings for it. Some of the men working have not received a farthing for over a fortnight. For humanity's sake, we feel glad that His Excellency the Governor has done what he could to get these men justice and to alleviate their condition, but they have a hard road to travel. Next week, we will print a facsimile of the contract. We will show up another phase of this rascality, and will stir the blood of every manly heart in the island who loves justice and fair play. We do not publish for sensationalism, but oppression stirs every fiber in our nature with indignation, and there are things the public should know. Now, before Monk could publish his promised expose, the Attorney General, the Honorable Reginald Gray, flexed his muscles and had the editor charged with criminal libel for his poor Simpson article. And we won't see, but right now we won't get into who these people were because they was all related. The magistrate, the judge, the prosecutor, and the lawyer in the island, the only lawyer in the island, were all related through blood or through marriage. Yes? But now let us get off the top of my head with this thing about Mr. A.B. Place, who is the editor of the building that houses across from the police station in Bermuda, the Bermuda Recorder building. It's got downstairs is a hairdressing place, and then they have clothes selling. But this is the Bermuda Recorder. But now Mr. A.B. Place found it in the early 20s. Now, Mr. Place, now in Bermuda, let's start with Mr. Monk. As you saw, Mr. Monk became editor-in-chief and producer of what they call the New Era. When he came from America, he is not only was he a clergyman, but he was a newspaper man as well. Yes? So he married a lady, and her father had also was a printer person. And so he came and he established this thing, but like I said, they kicked him out because of his agitation towards justice, which you can't find in any English court, as I said before. Because even though the governor said to pick up the mantle, he did pick up the mantle very hard. Because you can't, and these white people don't care nothing about us. So let me get out of this thing here. So this is Mr. Vinton Monk. He was a newspaper man, yeah? And next to come on the scene would have been Marcus Garvey, coming from out of Jamaica, yeah? What was he trained at? He was a newspaper man as well. He picked up, for me, he was one of the most charismatic black activists in the 20th century. Yeah, 19th century, 20, yeah, because he came in 19th century, 1900s, yeah, 20, yeah. So he was born late 1800s. So he came to Bermuda on the auspices of Mr. A.B. Place and the other Garveyites that was in Bermuda. So Marcus Garvey was a newspaper man, printer, and an activist freedom fighter. Mr. Winter Monk was a preacher. Mr. Garvey was also a Christian type of thing, but anyhow, Christian being a drug of choice at that time. But anyhow, Mr. A.B. Monk, so Mr. Winter Monk was a newspaper man, publisher. Same thing with Mr. Garvey. Mr. A.B. Place brought him here as a Garveyite. Like you said, started the paper here, Bermuda Recorder. And there's other stuff I could read to, but I have to go back and find it. But I wanted to bring forth their salient points. Yeah? I want to bring forth these salient points about what we're doing. About what we're doing during that time. Because we act like in Bermuda, we were not freedom fighters. Like early on, I read a piece from out of Chain in the Rock about Lady Black Bass. Named to history to us as only Black Bass. That's the name that we get down, Black Bass, who, being pregnant, wandered off one day, right? Wandered off one day and came back. When they came back, the white people then look and say, hey, you was pregnant when you left out of here. What happened to the baby? She didn't answer, but they went, traced the steps, and found the baby buried in the sand. Yeah? So they stood underneath the gallows for several hours. As they returned, they charged her with destroying the fruits of her womb, which was really the product of her masters, because she was owned by them. And this is the reason why she went out and had the baby and buried it in the sand. That she couldn't kill it, apparently, because it died a few days afterwards. They didn't charge her for that third. They just wanted to punish her and make her a lesson in scare tactics. But she was bound and determined that her child was not going to be a slave as she was, a chattel slavery. Now, what capitalist slavery? What is capitalist slavery? Debt slavery, because like they said, when you got put out without clothes, food, or shelter, you had to go, because you had vagabond laws, you had to go and ask the same person, because you could not move out of the place where you were set free in. You had to go to ask the person, hopefully to get some accommodation and some food and some clothing for working for them, a nominal price, of course, because they were like then. They're still not trying to pay you today. They pay themselves. Oh yes, white people, they pay themselves, but they ain't getting paid you. So hence we find that in Bermuda, as they saw in a publication not too long ago, that a white college graduate from up in Bermuda College versus a black college graduate makes up to $20,000 more. Yeah, and this is across the board. So does that make a difference if you're white or black, male or female? I'm talking about. Yeah. You don't care if you're a white male or white female, you get paid more than another college graduate. As a matter of fact, in this island, you would get paid more, and it happens in America too. You could get paid more as a non-college graduate than you would as a graduate and be the boss. And be the boss. So no, this thing about emancipation, cut match, chattel, and capital, all have at the root of it white people's psychopathic mentality about higher and lower, but I mean higher, lower, superior, and inferior. Yes, as we see in real history, real time, we're not talking about superior and inferior. We're talking about, how can I say, if you take it to what the white people talking about, where all civilization come from, as Convolin said, the person with the sable skin and frizzy hair is where that we have in slavery now, is where we got all our arts and sciences from. Yeah, everything that the white people know came from the black people. When we look at the oldest mathematical papyrus in the world, came from deep Africa, a place where they call Wasset. They call it now Luxor after the invading Arabs. Hence the term the luxuriousness, because the city was opulent, was the was called the University City. It was one of its appellations. Yes, because it was great learning there. That's why you see, that's where this artifact called the Rhine Mathematical Papyrus, and the other one called the Moscow Papyrus, because of where they are now. Rhine is the thief who took it out of I think he took it. He was Scottish, and he took it to. Right now, you can find that bit of literature in the British Museum. And like I said, Moscow, you got to go up into Moscow to see that one. But another interesting papyrus is called the it's a medical papyrus, which I forget because I did name it after these strange people in there. But it's a medical papyrus, which has much information on it concerning concerning medicine. And if you got this book here, The African Background to Medical Science, Essays on African History, Science and Civilization by Charles S. Finch, you could learn about all of these different things. Yeah. So I'm here trying to encourage people to read, and then read some more. Yes. Bermudan history is just as rich as foreign history. We need to read, and read some more. Get into these publications, get into all of these different things, so that we could teach our children. Because like I said, all of the information I gave over the last few weeks is very primary and very crucial to our restoring our true sense of who we are. Because right now we don't have any true sense of who we are. We identify as Black. I identify as a displaced African, because as you, all my books that I've read, we are called Africans. Yes, they called us Africans. We came from Africa. Yes, according to their stories. We in Bermuda we shy away from being identified as an African. From young, I'm 61 now, but from young, I never identified myself as a Bermudian. I am a displaced African. I have no problem, like I said, Jamaican, Barbadian, St. Kitts. What's the difference between us and Americans? What are we claiming? We're claiming the land that was stolen from other people by the white people, and we was placed on that land to work the land. Yeah, we grew up, so to speak, this is the term again, emancipation, but we fought for our independence, so to speak. In Bermuda, we have a government that started out talking about in the 60s that it wanted to take Bermuda into independence, because some of the leaders of that time came back from school and they was hanging with guys like Nkrumah and all of the other brothers from out of the West Indies and Africa, looking for liberation. And they came back with this great vision of liberation, of independence. Yes, but we see what happened to Jamaica when you go independent. And other countries, there's no such thing underneath white supremacy. There's no independence. Do not think that we're going to be independent in their economy. This is real. So when we look at Bermuda, and we're looking at what happened to the PRP up until today, the party still in existence, parties in power. But what did the present regime say? Oh, we're not going to go towards independence. They're not recognizing Black people. They're not recognizing their Africanness. I'm going to say the premier of this country, along with his cabinet, is very delinquent in carrying out the mandates of the end party. Yeah, it's not about what the people them say, because the people them say is very much colonialized, neo-colonialized. It's about what the party was standing for. Yes, independence away from this European mindset. But now you're seeing like the government of the day, who's now took over, is looking very much on a white tip. And I say that without apology. Them who know me, I don't apologize for this, because I'm going to tell them, in Bermuda, the elected MP that you give your vote for 5 years, on being sworn in by the representative of the Queen and all other governing bodies in this island come on the same jurisdiction, they pledge their allegiance as members of Parliament to the Queen or to the Crown. It is not to the people of Bermuda. They do not pledge allegiance to the people of Bermuda. They pledge allegiance to the Crown. So I ask you, people of Bermuda, what are we really doing in this life that we live? When I read all of this stuff and we did the research on the stuff, that protest that we was having since 1835. Yeah, because remember in 1840s, in the 1840s when they first brought who they claimed to be Portuguese, never came from Portugal. They came from the Madeira Islands. They was bought and paid for and landed in Bermuda to take the places of the black people who was saying to the white people, well, we're not going to work for their pittance. So they took public monies, which the black people had put taxes in. They took these monies and paid and bought for these 400 or so Madeira Islanders who were slaves, because Britain, Portugal, and then slavery and the slavery after the Bermudian people did, yes, or the English did, I was just to say. But anyhow, they were not free people. That's why when they come into Bermuda, they are not labeled as black or white. This is the reason why they're not labeled as black or white, because they was mixed. One could say they was mixed. There was only Portuguese in name only, because Madeira Island is just a couple of miles off the coast of Africa. Nowhere near Portugal. And so the people then came to Bermuda to see this Portuguese, and they became a color which is called Portuguese, because in Bermuda you had the black and you had the white. And like I said, the Indian got absorbed into the black. So they're no longer recognizable or visible as Indians. So they'll be talking about the people from down Sendeos or being the Pequots, or we used to say Mohawks before when we had no knowledge of, but now there's been research to say that, well, there was Pequots. And I'm going to say they were not solely in St. David's. They were spread all across this island from east to west, yes, as slaves. You understand? Some of them became free. One white woman was, how can I say, charged, and an Indian slave was beaten because she was having sexual relations with him. Yes, very interesting. But then we find a white boy being married to, how they say, Pocahontas' handmaiden, who was captured from out of America, and they had a big wedding for her down here. It's like, really? She had a choice? I didn't think so. She was a captive. She was a captive like the rest of us were. We had no choice in the matter. So the history of the island, the history of the world is such that white people write this history about the good things that they've done, never about the bad things that they've done. Although they write the bad things, but they don't highlight them. As a matter of fact, you can find in America now they're trying to erase certain things out of the history books. And they're being allowed because, once again, we talking about laws. And who makes the laws? These laws that was the vagabond laws and all the other laws that's entrenched in Bermuda, you go back in the law books of Bermuda and you see them now. They were not put there by black people. But now that the black people are in power, they're making other laws which is just as onerous as the white people. So no, we don't give any credence to because you're black, you mean something. No, man. Let me show you something right now. In that book, Chain of the Rock, which is, I'm sorry. And this time is almost done. There's this book, Chain of the Rock, by Chain of the Rock by Mr. Cyril Packwood. It's something that every black person should get. But in there, it states that when the black people was trying to do all of these rebellious things and come out of the slavery thing, they was prepared to kill all the white people in this island. But why they fail is because quite often the inside people gave them up. Inside people give them up. We have a lot of sellout in black communities from then, from then until now. So I don't want to hear about black government. What are you doing for the people then? You're going to be empowered, then you're going to tell the people how to go, which way to go. That is not what you're empowered for. You're not there to dictate to people. You're put there to serve the people. But now you're in the position of servitude. Now you become the position of earner. Really? That's how the white people carried on. But now we find the black people doing the same thing. Why? Because they've been trained according to white people. Oh, yes, that was the last thing I meant to read too. Let me see if I can find it. Education. Let me quickly see if I can find it. And let's see if I can read it. Okay. Education, 98 to 98. But this is why we are the way we are now. General education for slave children was non-existent. Page 98. General education for slave children was non-existent until the 19th century. In earlier periods, a few masters taught their slaves to read, but this was the exception rather than the rule. As early as 1645, Captain William Jackson gave Governor Sale £150 for the education of poor children, but this was not intended for black children. 3 years later, masters were advised to teach their young slaves to read so that they could understand the Bible. This instruction was to be centered around and limited to the Bible only, thus making the slave more complacent in slavery. However, if a slave could read the good book, he could also read any book and that he got his hands on. The words to be brought up to readings as far as the understanding of the Bible appeared in numerous terms of sales. In some cases, they were carried out because a few blacks during the 17th century could read and write. Education was available to white children only during the first 200 years of Bermuda's existence. Many of them did not attend, thus accounting for the high degree of white illiteracy. And there's not much change now. A report to Whitehall in January 14th, a day after my birthday, about a couple of hundred years before, anyhow, in 1724, by Governor Hope mentioned that glebe lands and school lands possessed by parsons and those teaching public schools. The school's pupils did not include blacks. A grand scheme was proposed in 1724 to erect the College of Bermuda, Bishop George Berkeley, and this is what talk about George Berkeley's scheme. Having written a tract entitled "A Proposal for the Better Supplying of Churches in Our Foreign Plantations and for the Conversion of the Savage Americans to Christianity by a college to be erected in the Summer Islands, otherwise called the Isles of Bermuda." Bermuda was chosen because of its location, climate, and closeness to the British colonies. In 1725, remember America was still a colony. In 1725, Bishop Berkeley presented a petition to the king for a charter to a college to be named St. Paul's College in Bermuda. The college would not only educate the Indian savage Americans, but supply them with clothing, lodging, and diet. See, food, clothing, and shelter. That's why they said emancipation. At the rate of 10 pounds per annum for each. Blacks were not included in the Blacks were not included in this educational scheme, neither Indian slaves living in Bermuda. The idea was to give a religious education to American Indians and have them return to the mainland and convert their fellow Indians to Christianity. Yes? So this was the plan of Bishop Berkeley. It never was secured, but hence we have the Berkeley Institute for another reason that I read about some other place. But anyhow, this is 3 minutes to go. So this is the final portion of my history of the Emancipation Cup match. It was a celebration or a protest. For me, it was a protest, but should be still ongoing because the conditions has not changed. Like the black people of that time knew that they was going from chattel slavery to capital slavery, called debt slavery. Up until today, we live by debt. You get electricity, debt. You have furnace, debt. You have food, debt. Because in order to get this thing, you got to go out and work. Yeah? But yet, we have never been paid for any work that we did. But yet, we're still working. They took our taxes to use against us. And this is the legacy. They paid themselves for not paying us. They paid themselves for not paying us. Yep, they relinquished the responsibility of housing, clothing, and feeding us, like was playing Bishop Berkeley to house, clothing, and feed these natives before he sent them back. Like seeds, like infested seeds. And that's the reason for education in this island, is to make us more compliant to the operations of the white people. Education is not to uplift people. It was meant to control people, and it's still being done today. Hence the government of the day that we have today. So yes. This is Haile Griot saying, we know a lot, yet we know very little about the left that we know. We need to have correct information, such as Renoka Rashidi has put forth in his books, The African Presence in Early Asia, or the Dr. Mansermity, African Presence in Early Europe. These books are very valuable to me. Yeah? So, yes, once again, I'm going to say, Hotep, everyone. Peace and blessings. One love. We're getting out. Oh, it says we got 5-6 more minutes to go. Dang, my clock is off. Oh, maybe it was what happened because I gave myself half an hour earlier. Okay. So continue a little bit on. Like I said, Dr. Rashidi, a great loss for me, a great loss for Bermuda. Great loss for the world. Yeah, so I can read a little bit of piece from editorial. This issue, entitled The African Presence in Early Asia, is the first in a series of books on the African physical and cultural presence in world civilizations. It is followed by The African Presence in Early Europe, 86, and The African Presence in Early America, which I do have. Asia is one area in which I, as editor, have never done any substantial research, and it is the first time in the 6 years of my editorship that I have delegated responsibility to another to solicit relevant articles and coordinate the research efforts of a body of scholars in a particular field. The result has been most reassuring and makes me confident the work of the journal will continue in the same level of competence when the burdens of building a responsible new school of African civilization history is finally lifted from my shoulders. Right? This is going to be from I'm thinking it's going to be from Dr. Van Sedema, right? Yeah, so that was, introduction to the 10th anniversary. What I'm looking at. Still getting so. Introduction to 10th anniversary edition, African Presence in Early Asia by Renoka Rashidi. We now know, based on recent scientific studies of DNA, that modern humanity originated in Africa, that African peoples are the world's original peoples, and that all modern humans can ultimately trace their ancestral roots back to Africa. Were it not for the primordial migrations of early African people, humanity would have remained physically Africanoid, and the rest of the world outside of the African continent, absent of human life, since the first modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, in Asia were of African birth. The African presence in ancient Asia can therefore be demonstrated through the history of the Black population that have inhabited the Asian landmass within the span of modern humanity. But not only were the African people the first inhabitants of Asia, there's abundant evidence to show that the Black people within documented historical periods created or influenced some of the ancient Asia's most important and early enduring high cultures. African Presence in Early Asia, edited by Renoka Rashidi and Ivan Van Sedema, is the most comprehensive publication of its type in existence. It is a project involving the work of more than 20 contributors. It is ambitious in its scope and pioneering in its approach in the sense that there are few real blueprints or detailed guidelines to follow. It is an effort of reconstruction and definition. It is a distinct and essentially unique publication in the sense that by the African presence in Asia, we are referencing all the Black populations that have peopled Asia within both the prehistoric and historic periods. We are using the words African and Black interchangeably. This is what I do. As synonyms. This includes African peoples in the first modern humans in Asia. The subsequent migrations and movements of African peoples impacted the essential character and content of classical Asian civilizations, and the later involuntary arrival of African peoples in Asia resulting from slavery. So all the way through, getting there ourselves and being brought there as well. Well, for well over a century, Western historians, ethnologists, anthropologists, archaeologists, and other such specialists have generally and often arbitrarily used the terms such as Negro, Proto-Negroid, Proto-Australoid, Negrid, Negrito and Negrito in laboring populations in Asia with Africoid phenotypes and African cultural traits and historical traditions. This has especially been the case with Black populations in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Far East Asia. In Southwestern Asia, on the other hand, terms like Hamites, Euro-Africans, Mediterraneans, and the brown race have commonly been employed in denoting clearly discernible Black populations. In this work, we have chosen to reject such deliberately confusing nomenclature as obsolete and invalid, unscientific, and racially motivated. So that's just a little piece coming from out of these great works. Yeah, so like I said, I'm going to encourage everyone to read, as Eddie Griffith said, reading is fundamental. Yes? So this is what we must do. This is what I encourage everybody to do, and read books that have very good meaning. So hood tap, everyone. Bless up. I think I'm going to stop now because it says 2:30. Yes? 2 hours and 2 hours and 30 minutes? I don't know, live, 2 hours and 30 minutes. Yeah, from 7 to 8:30. It's an hour and a half, I should say. So let us give thanks and go forward. Peace and love. Hotep, everyone. Stop sharing that. And stop the camera.